I am so thrilled so many of you could make it today. My name is Christy Statz, and I am the mobilizer for Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana for Bibles, Badges, and Business of the National Immigration Forum. I'm an Ohio girl. I grew up in Northeast Ohio. I was away for a while, and I'm back. So it gives me special pleasure to invite so many fellow Ohioans to our conversation today. Immigration Ohio 2020, Complex Questions and Solutions with Dignity. This is the conversation I know so many of us need to have right now. And I would like to invite on Melody Scott, the Dean of Students at Malone University, who is one of the fellow co-conspirators in this project. Melody, welcome. Would you share a little bit about why you wanted to host this event?
For sure, thank you. We wanted to host this conference because it aligns with one of our principles in seeking truth in all areas. For us at Malone, this quest for truth involves engaging in civil dialogue, working for justice, and strengthening our communities. And we believe we're called to learn from, develop relationships with, and demonstrate concern for our neighbors. So immigration impacts us all. Today, we have more than 40 million people living in the US who were born in another country. Our population is diverse, and within this spectrum of human variation, people have come for all different reasons, and many have stories of suffering. And if one member suffers, we all suffer together. So we want to be part of finding real solutions for an immigration system that works, and this involves honoring traditions of the law while promoting a humane immigration system that's beneficial for all. So today we're excited to look at complex questions and dignified solutions. We want to also thank the National Immigration Forum and the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities for co-sponsoring this event. And now I'll turn it back to Christy.
So today you are going to see a series of speakers. We will have panels. We're going to have some videos in between panels. I hope you enjoy it. For those who've been asking, yes, we will be recording all of it, and it will be posted on YouTube as well as the National Immigration Forum website. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome our first speaker. Her name is Jill Stoltzfus. She is the executive director of this, oh my gosh, Jill, I'm of the Association for a More Just Society. I was thinking of your Spanish name and almost threw it. We're gonna hand it over to Jill. Go ahead, Jill. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Christy, and good morning to all of you. It is truly an honor to be with you this morning and to really kick off this day of learning together about such an important topic of migration. My name is Jill Stoltzfus. I'm the Executive Director of the Association for a More Just Society. And I'm here because AJS has an expertise in Honduras. And I'm excited to share more with you about how our conversation on migration is connected to the work we are doing in Honduras with AJS. Honduras is a country right in the middle of Central America. It's part of what is known, especially in the world of immigration conversations, of the Northern Triangle, along with its neighbors of El Salvador and Guatemala. Honduras is a place that I have had the opportunity to go to regularly over the last 12 years now. And we're going to be talking today about quite a few of the challenges it faces, but this is a country that I love. This is a beautiful country. From its lush green mountain ranges to the deep rainforest to some of the most beautiful coral reef in the world. And I'd say for all of you fellow coffee drinkers out there, there's a good chance you probably had some Honduran coffee beans in that roast of yours this morning. And what I have experienced from the Hondurans that I have gotten to know over the years is that they have a deep commitment and love for their country. I think of people like my coworkers, Maribel and Lester, who are married, and together I think they have 2 doctorates and 3 master's degrees from universities from around the world. They really would have the opportunity to live and work and raise their daughter almost anywhere. But they've said that they have chosen to stay in Honduras because they have a deep commitment to their country, to use the privilege that they have to make it a better place, a place where families can feel safe and where people can flourish. And it's not just Maribel and Lester, but we have over 100 Honduran staff members, and really just a few of us North Americans who are carrying out the work of AJS. Again, they are deeply committed to making their country a better place. Our staff gives me so much hope that Honduras will change, will transform. And I admit, given the complexity of some of the challenge it faces, things like drug trafficking, poverty, gangs, political instability, I can lose hope. But AJS has spent over 20 years working to address these challenges. My Honduran colleagues have shown that progress is possible, and that gives me hope because we have seen change. I also have hope because we serve a God that is faithful. He has given us, as his agents of change, a vision for what he would like to see in his world. He wants to see the kingdom at hand. He gives us a really beautiful vision for what that kingdom can look like in Zechariah 8, verses 4 and 5. That verse says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, old men and old women shall again sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each with staff in hand because of their great age. And the streets of the city shall be full of boys and girls playing in the streets." Now, that may not seem like a huge vision, but for us at AJS and in Honduras, that is what we are working for. We want to once again see old men and old women. We want to see kids who are free to play in the streets. But if you've heard about Honduras, you've probably heard about this country that's linked to the challenges it faces. Or you've heard of Hondurans who have decided to migrate to the US. In 2019, Hondurans represented 27% of people filing for asylum or apprehended at the US border. The Northern Triangle countries, along with Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, they represented 71%. This is also much different than it was 15 years ago, where less than 15% of people apprehended at the border were from the Northern Triangle. If we want to understand migration, we have to gain an understanding of what is happening in these countries. For AJS, as we have worked in communities and researched, it has become clear that people make the difficult decision to leave really because of two categories of factors that I'd like to talk about. The first category is what I'd call pull factors. These are factors which attract or draw people to the US and elsewhere. Things like employment and opportunity for family reasons or for security. I'd like to note that these things are the good things that we find here in the US. These are not things that we want to see changed. We don't want more insecurity or the lack of opportunity. These are good things. But in the second category of factors that I call push factors, these are factors that we do want to see change. These are factors which drive people to leave a place or a situation. And there are many: poverty, underemployment, and unemployment. But what I'd like to focus on are two factors that I believe are two of the most influential factors to why we are seeing migration today, and that's violence and corruption. In 2011 and 2012, Honduras had the highest homicide rate in the world. It was 13 times Ohio's homicide rate. You can see on the graph where Ohio's homicide rate compares to where Honduras's was. What I'd also specifically like to note here is you can see the significant growth in a very short amount of time. The homicide rate almost tripled in 6 years. And what changed? We should be asking ourselves, what changed during this time? The big thing that changed during this time period in Honduras was that the drug trade started using Honduras as the primary transit point of cocaine coming from South America and coming here to North America. The maps that you see on the screen right now show the difference between suspected drug flights in 2007 to 2011. We as US citizens carry responsibility for the violence and the increase of violence in Honduras. Our demand for drugs causes a ripple effect of violence throughout Honduras. We carry the responsibility for one of the factors that is driving people to leave their homes. These are not just statistics. These are not just numbers. This is people. These are people's lives. People like Martha, who has lost 3 family members to violence, some of whom were killed because they were trying to push back against the violence that was happening in their community. And beyond the personal cases and the families affected by violence personally, there are societal impacts. Things like churches can't hold evening services. Kids are unable to attend school safely because of the gangs in their communities. These are complex and, quite frankly, dangerous situations to address. But it's exactly what AJS has felt called to, exactly what my Honduran colleagues have done. They have developed a model that has decreased homicide rates by over 75% in especially violent communities, working with people like Martha to make sure their cases go through the right processes, providing her counseling and healing. This graph shows what happened in the initial community that we worked in Nueva Suyapa. It's the blue line on this graph. You can see how the homicide rate decreased rapidly in the first 5 years of the program. Not only is that incredible, but you can see what was happening in the country at the same time with the red line. That was the same time frame that the homicide rate almost tripled in the country. The community that we worked in completely bucked the trend of what was going on in Honduras. Now, I would love to get into methodology and how this happened and why, but we don't have time for that today. But especially for any of you law enforcement officials listening, I would love to talk more with you about this methodology and what we've done and seen. This is actually also a program that until funding was cut to the region last year, that the US government was helping to replicate successfully in 5 additional communities in Honduras, trying to address some of the push factors causing migration. But let's move on to that second factor that is also driving migration: corruption. Now, to me, corruption can sometimes feel abstract, but here is how we would define corruption. Corruption is using your power for personal gain. Specifically for AJS, we focus on public officials using their power to benefit themselves versus the public systems which are meant to especially help the most vulnerable. Systems like the public healthcare system and the public education system. These are systems that are daily affecting the lives of Hondurans. Let me give you just one example of how these systems and how the brokenness within the systems have affected the daily lives of people. I think we've all probably learned the importance of having strong health systems in our world this year. So I'll focus on the healthcare system. One of the pillars that is foundational to AJS's work is research. Within healthcare, we started researching especially the purchases that were being made by public officials. One of the reports we did tested the quality of medicine that was being purchased and then given or sold at the clinics and hospitals throughout Honduras, where 80% of the Honduran population is dependent on the medicine provided in those locations. I remember this report, and I remember talking to our executive director, Carlos Hernandez in Honduras, who's pictured here with his mom. And he said, this report especially struck me. And I remember reading it, and I just started crying. And I was reading about the qualities of medicine and how so many of the medicines being given to people were completely ineffective. He said, I remember especially coming across one, it was a high blood pressure medicine, and he said, I immediately thought of my mother who was on high blood pressure medicine. And as he read about that medicine, he saw that the contents of the medicine was not actually medicine, it was flour. It was a flour pill. These systems and corruption affect the daily lives of people in Honduras. AJS has helped since then to put a special medicine purchasing process for the national healthcare system. We've increased that accountability to provide more transparency throughout the process, and the system is now a model and a standard of how purchases should be done, which is especially important this year during the season of COVID-19. We've also helped to train community members in knowing what their health system should look like in their communities. They go to their clinics to make sure the right supplies and medicines are being delivered, to make sure the doctors and nurses are showing up on the days they're supposed to see patients. This creates local accountability and is empowering for those community members. And it also helps to rebuild trust in a system that has failed them for so long. We have seen important changes in Honduras, but the challenges still continue. We've seen the homicide rate in Honduras drop by over 50% in 8 years. But it still remains too high, still remains almost 8 to 10 times the US rate. If we want to sustain the good work that's already being done, we in this room, we here in the US need to come alongside Hondurans to address the push factors causing migration. We need to do this not only to prevent migration, but also to seek the flourishing of people, to seek the flourishing of Hondurans. We are all people made in the image of God. We are called to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And as we have learned, not only do we need to love them, but we have learned today that we carry a responsibility for the suffering that they are experiencing. There are brave Christian Honduran leaders working, risking their lives to address these things, to address corruption, to protect children from violence. They are boldly living out God's requirement on us when He says that we must act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly. We here today have the opportunity to join them in helping to transform Honduras, to sustain the changes that we're already seeing. Being involved in this type of work will not only help to transform Honduras, but I believe it will help us address some of our own complex issues that we face here in the US. I and we have so much to learn from these brave Hondurans who have been doing this complex work of justice successfully. To conclude, I'd like to introduce you to two of those people, two of the people that inspire me, who I have learned a lot from. The first is Hillary Gomez. She is a young adult working to create a culture of peace in her community. And Kayla Garcia, who is in charge of doing some of that in-depth research and reporting and changing national structures. Honduras faces many challenges, and we have seen so much progress, but we know more is possible. And I have hope in part because of Hillary and because of Kayla. And I hope after watching this video, you will too.
Invite you all to get involved in this work, to seek justice, because all humans must live with dignity as God's masterwork.
Mi nombre es Hillary Gómez y soy internacionalista y me apasionan las causas sociales y específicamente luchar por la justicia en mi país. Esta pasión surge por los desafíos que a diario enfrentamos en Honduras, como ser la violencia, la corrupción y la impunidad. Lo que me anima a seguir en esta lucha es que existen otras y otros jóvenes que desean una sociedad más justa y cada día con sus capacidades, talentos, deseo y amor por el país trabajan para lograrlo. Les animo a cada uno de ustedes a que trabajemos por hacer justicia, por tener comprensión y amar hacer lo bueno, para que cada uno de nosotros tengamos la sociedad que tanto hemos anhelado.
Thank you, and I hope you consider joining us in this work of justice in Honduras.
All right, thank you so much, Jill, for that. What a powerful presentation. My name is Jeff Carlson. I work for the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, and we welcome you at this point to submit any questions you may have for Jill. But just to kick it off, Jill, could you maybe explain a little more how U.S. asylum policy has affected Hondurans in the last few years?
Yeah, and I'm guessing there are some people on the call that know more about asylum law than I do, but as I explained in the presentation, violence is one of those push factors causing migration. And so many Hondurans have used that asylum system, that they are fearful for their lives in Honduras, to be able to try and find legal status here in the US. So asylum is a legal mechanism that is being used for Hondurans to seek a new life here in the US. Yeah.
Great. Are there any other questions for Jill? I guess one more that I would be thinking of is when people see the statistics about violence in Honduras and not being proximate to that issue, I can see people thinking, why would we want these people in the first place to come to our country? So what would you say to someone who would sort of take that point of view after seeing sort of what goes on in Honduras?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to know that the violence impacting Honduras is really perpetrated by a few people. It's not all of Hondurans are violent. You can see that in like the earlier pieces of the graph. Honduras didn't used to be violent. It was actually known as the peaceful country. It never had civil wars like El Salvador, Guatemala did in the 80s. It was the peaceful nation. But the violence being perpetrated is by a very few people. And what we've found, especially in these very violent communities, is that if you can look at a community, so the community that we piloted the project in, Nueva Suyapa, That was a community of about 35,000 people. And it was a couple dozen people in that entire community that was holding the whole community captive within violence. And so if we can really target the violent people and the systems of violence within those communities, that's how we can really shift the needle. But it is not all Hondurans who are violent. It is the very few people perpetrating violent crime in Honduras.
Great. And we have one more question from Eric asking, how is the faith community coming together in Honduras to help their communities?
Yeah. So Honduras is it is a very Christian nation, you can say. There's been a huge revival in the evangelical church in the early 80s, mid 80s. Honduras was about 5% evangelical and mostly Catholic. Today, it's almost half of the population is evangelical and about 45% Catholic. It has significantly grown, and it has caused a revival in the Catholic Church as well. But Christians, I'd say they have a unique and important role to play in the moments right now. So AJS, there's a team that's called the Brave Christians team. They have well over 20,000 people as a part of that network who pray and come together to push for change in their country. And you see Christian leaders really taking a stand to help address some of these factors. So one thing I didn't talk about is AJS leaders have been at the forefront of purging and transforming the national police force. And that was led by the person who at the time was the head of the National Evangelical Association of Churches in Honduras. So imagine that, like the head of the evangelical church in charge of purging and transforming the police force. It is faith leaders that are really driving and helping to sustain this change. And I think it's partly because it's people in their congregations, people in their communities who are affected by violence. And we have a unique role to play in showing love and doing justice for our communities.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jill. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. But thank you so much for joining us and for all the work that AJS is doing.
Thank you.